One misconception about determinism is that the reason people don't like it or they aren't comfortable with the idea is that it means that since you're not in control, you can't change. Well, what if determinism actually makes change easier, simpler, and ultimately helps us understand change? So first off, the idea, okay, if you don't have control, if everything is predestined, if you're just living out a script, living out someone else's life, living out effectively a movie, how can you change something? And, of course, the truth is you can't change anything. You can't really change anything, but that doesn't mean that change doesn't happen. So you are listening to this now. That's something that, for whatever reason, the universe has brought you to, and it could be that that's part of your journey, part of how change is happening in your life. So change happens through you. It happens with you. You are a part of that change, but you don't control it. Much like you really can't control all of the things that went into making you decide to change or to not change. So there's so many factors are part of your life that you don't really have control over. And then when it comes to, change, it has to start with there's a problem. So I don't like something about my life, or I want to improve something about my life, and or I feel insecure or anxious about something in my life, and it needs to change. But the first message in determinism is that your life is just fine. You're exactly where you're supposed to be. At every moment of your life, you are exactly where you're supposed to be, and there is nothing wrong with any of it. And you might feel uncomfortable. You might feel like, I don't like where I am. I don't like the way my life is going. I don't like the problems in my life. But that realization is part of the journey of change. You're not going to change while being unaware or out of the blue or spontaneously. The change instead wells up in you as part of your process that has extended from birth and from before birth. So you can look at this on a larger level with our world, our country, in that the world, society starts to become uncomfortable with things, starts to be uncomfortable with human rights abuses or with prejudice or with all of these things that we're waking up to and realizing don't work for us or that create situations that we don't like. So we become uncomfortable with those things, and we live with that discomfort for a little while until it becomes intolerable, and then society changes. And over time, all of those people who held on to that old thinking eventually either change with society or society leaves them behind. But eventually, society changes. So in the age in which some people grew up, corporal punishment, spanking your children, was very common, universal really. And then society became uncomfortable with that, and certain people spoke up. And over time, that idea started to change, and the idea of what, is healthiest for the children, what is better for them. So it's no longer, my grandfather's story of his father sending him off to get a hickory switch whenever he had done something wrong. So now that really doesn't happen. No one, I think it's pretty uncommon, right, that someone would send their child out to pick up a stick and bring it back to them so that they could be beaten with it. Now that seems pretty crazy, but to my grandfather, that was just how it worked. That's how child raising worked. But now to do that, and we see, some celebrity cases where, there's some degree of child abuse involved, and it's horrifying. So as a society, we have changed, but, what brought upon us that change was the increased awareness, this increased realization of discomfort, and then ultimately that discomfort created the change in us as a society. The same is true for us personally, that there is this journey of discomfort that starts with awareness. We become aware of things, and more aware of those things we might always have been aware of. And that level of awareness grows and grows and creates this discomfort. The discomfort forces us, ultimately, to realize that our situation is untenable, that the way that we have been living our life really doesn't work, which is different from the outside pressure of where we feel like in order to meet society's conventions, or in order to become more acceptable to, the people that we interact with, to be a better, date, or to be a better, employee, that we must make certain changes to be more acceptable to others, which is still part of our process. It's still part of that discomfort. It's discomfort from an externalized source. So now, with the advent of remote work, for those people who are fortunate enough to be able to work from home, much of what they would do is gone. So you're not going to get on a Zoom call with your coworkers and expect to see a tie. And yet, if we went back, for example, for my first job, a tie was mandatory. Even though I did not have a face-to-face encounter with I worked on a phone, call center, and I still had to wear a tie because there was an expectation from the outside that this is something I needed to do. And the moment that pressure went away, the society said, well, you don't need to wear a tie. Then poof, tie was gone. So however we are going through that process is how we're meant to go through it. And the discomfort that we feel, whether it is externally or internally, is still appropriate to our situation. Everything you're going through is valid. And that's ultimately what determinism is about, is because it can't be anything other than valid, because there is no other option for it to be. Everything you're experiencing, your discomfort, the change that you feel needs to happen, and everything about that is exactly where it needs to be, which goes to whether or not that change occurs or not. So this is the New Year's resolution curse, where every New Year's we think about, oh man, here's all the things that are wrong with my life and things that I should change or improve about myself. But this is very perfunctory, because if you only think about it on New Year's Eve, then it's probably not that significant. But nonetheless, we sort of beat ourselves up over these things that perhaps we haven't really met certain expectations that we've placed on ourselves, or that others have placed on us, for what our life should really look like. And so we're like, oh, okay, this year I'm going to make a better effort. This is going to be a better year. And then there's this inherent disappointment that comes with not being able to meet those desires. So you might, for example, a person might be a smoker and say, this is my year to quit smoking. I'm not going to smoke anymore. But then, that doesn't happen. And now it's time to beat yourself up again and say, well, I couldn't do it, but I'll do it next year. And then there's another opportunity to beat yourself up again. And, every moment that you move forward without making this change, realizing that, as, the smoking is unhealthy, or it's really bad for you, yet you do it anyway, which is true of so many other things as well. And you say, well, I'll make the change. This is the time. And you just keep beating yourself up and going around that, feeling worse and worse, which ultimately is that, discomfort looking to, resolve itself. But wherever we are in that, and how uncomfortable we feel, or even when we're beating ourselves up over not being able to make those changes, wherever we are in that process is exactly where we're supposed to be. And that's kind of the crazy thing about determinism, is there's no sense of failure. You can't fail in determinism. You cannot, if you didn't make the change at that point, it's because it wasn't the right time in which you made the change, because you're not responsible for that change. The universe is making that change. You're watching the movie. So you take this kind of personally and say, well, I failed in this regard. I wasn't able to stop smoking. But that's not, what's happening. You're watching. It's like the movie where in the movie, the person you're watching in the movie isn't able to stop smoking, and you can empathize with them, but it's not personal. It's not you who have stopped smoking or have failed to stop smoking. It's the character in the movie. And, determinism kind of gives you that separation to say that if something is happening right now, it's supposed to happen. And, if you're listening to this and that then helps you feel better about things that you haven't been able to complete in your life, so that's meant to happen as well. Everything that's happening is meant to happen. Everything that's happening is appropriate. Everything that's, is exactly where it has to be, even when that's uncomfortable and even when that's even terrible. So many things have happened. We look back in history, and there's this old maxim of, like, why do bad things happen to good people? And it is because each one of those things that happens, and every single thing that does happen, is exactly what has to happen. There's no other universe in which an alternative history exists. There's no, choice about it, because this is so much more than you or I personally. We don't control all these things. We don't control the age in which we're born. If we were born 10,000 years ago, our lives would be pretty different. We didn't control that. We're here now. And what's happening now is vastly beyond our capability to control or even comprehend. So when it comes to smoking, you only see the smoking. You only see, well, I'm smoking and I shouldn't be smoking. But you don't see all the other factors that play into that. Everything else that led up to that moment. Maybe at some point you take a moment and you realize, oh, okay, well, my parents smoked, so that probably didn't help. Or you realize that you went through a traumatic incident and there was some, self-medication that was occurring. Or you look at all these. Nothing is without its cause. It's just that those causes are so numerous, so vast, so incomprehensible, that often you can only see the end result. And you don't see everything that went into it. You're just looking at the one problem that you failed to solve. And that you feel like, I wish I could change and make this happen. So that's where determinism feels like kind of a slap in the face, because, it's saying, I can't change this. But that change is going to happen, and you don't have to worry about it. That the right thing is always going to happen. The change is going to happen without you having to force it through. You don't need to make any more New Year's Eve resolutions. That's not necessary. The change isn't stoppable either. You can't not change. You have to change. It's like change is the only constant. And it doesn't require any special effort on your part. So it's okay to just say, hey, I am where I am, and that's fine. Even when where I am isn't where I have envisioned myself to be, or where I haven't met expectations, or other people haven't met, I haven't met other people's expectations, but that's still fine. There's nothing wrong with any of that, because there isn't another way. So people have these expectations of you, or you have expectations of yourself, but there's no other way for you to be. So these expectations, including your discomfort from feeling those expectations, also really can't change. Now, perhaps what's happening right now is you're reevaluating, and this, listening to this is helping you, or is part of that journey of reevaluation, to say maybe I should take it easy on myself and stop blaming myself for all these things, that setting up these unreasonable expectations for what my life is going to include or not include, or meeting other people's expectations. Maybe I should, chill on that a little bit and go easy on myself, realizing that I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. And I think that's the benefit as it pertains to change in determinism, is to just, dial it down a bit. That all of that extra pressure, and maybe you're feeling it, and maybe you're supposed to feel that, because that's where you are right now. But also, when you're absorbing the idea that everything is appropriate, everything is exactly where it has to be at every moment, then it relieves you of that pressure and responsibility for being this perfect or ideal person that can make all of these, great choices and meet all these expectations and change your life to, you go on these all self-helps, Tony Robbins, that kind of stuff. It's like, oh, you are ultimately, the message is you're not where you're supposed to be, and you're supposed to change. You're supposed to become a better person. But listening to Tony Robbins, it's like this self-flagellation of just, I'm just going to keep listening to all this self-help stuff until the floggings will continue until morale improves. And that's our way of feeling that discomfort and building that discomfort so that I'll eventually change. And maybe that is the process that you're going through, and that's okay too. So even when you say, there's no part of this that says, well, you're going through a bad process, or you've made a mistake, or you've done this the wrong way. So by listening to Tony Robbins, you're now making an additional mistake. You're compounding upon errors. None of that's true. Listening to Tony Robbins, and going through that process of beating yourself up over not being Tony Robbins or not following his advice, or not being capable of being the kind of perfect person that you envision, that's part of your process right now, and that's okay too. That's fine. There's no part of this that is not okay. Even when you get into bad situations, even when you make terrible mistakes, no matter what it is, we feel like an obligation to feel bad for things. Oh, I did a terrible thing. I hurt someone. I did all these other things, and so I should feel bad about it. But there isn't another way it could have happened. And even the worst things that happen in life and in history also couldn't have happened any other way. We think about all these terrible things, and that's actually what goes back to the why do bad things happen to good people. It's because it's not an intent. The universe isn't hunting you down or persecuting you. It is just that you can't see the whole pattern, you can't see the whole picture, and you can't see why this matters. Even when it's, why do even bad things matter? Why does everything have significance? It may not go the way you want. We all want perhaps to live the life of a superstar, of a movie star, of someone who's wealthy, and that's not your life, But it is the perfect life for you. It's this life the universe gave you, the life that was meant for you. It is your, specific journey and destiny. And I'm kind of reminded in a little bit of like Christianity. So Christianity does a lot with trying to get people to change. People go to Christianity or go to religion in general to change themselves. So I'm more familiar with Christianity than I am with many other religions, so that's why it comes to mind. But it's sort of like Jonah. Jonah tries to avoid his fate. And so he does everything he can to run away from it, but no matter where he goes, it follows him. Because he cannot escape his journey. He can't just arbitrarily uproot himself and then go somewhere without that connective tissue. We have this idea, it's almost like teleportation, where I'm going to go somewhere, but my past won't follow me. But every time you look behind you, there's your shadow of your past. It's like, there's this neurotic looking down and seeing your shadow and running away from it. Like Peter Pan trying to divorce yourself from your own shadow, from your own past, your own journey. I don't want to be part of that anymore. And I can just, cut it away. And then, the other story of dramatic change is the Apostle Paul. So Paul is a killer, a murderer, goes and hunts people down, that these Christians, right, hunts them down and does bad things to them. And on his way to do so, he basically gets hit by lightning. The clouds open up. You've probably seen this in movies where he gets basically struck by an epiphany that what he's doing is the wrong thing. And this isn't something that he intended. So he didn't go off and try to kill all these people so he could have this epiphany. Instead, it happened, regardless of him. There was nothing about that he could have avoided. And once it happened, there was no way for him to undo it. So he was changed. He wasn't the source of that change. And we are all that witness, that passenger, that we are going through a process that's far more complicated than we're possibly able to control. We can't simply, flip a switch and change. And so to just be more surrender, to be more accepting of the process we're going through, I think makes the process of change easier, simpler. You are going to change. Don't worry about it. You're fine. The things that you want are going to happen if they're what's supposed to happen. And we have this conception of what is supposed to happen that may not be the right thing. There's like a Rolling Stones, you don't always get what you want, but you always get what you need. So, what's really needing to change is the conception of what we want and the acceptance of what we need or what we have, what our life truly is. And the last kind of Christian reference there is the idea of sin. So, like Christ says, go and sin no more. So it's that our sin is when we create harm in the world, when we do things we're not supposed to do. And the idea of getting forgiveness is to forgive ourselves for that sin, and then not keep making the same mistakes. So you could look at it like, well, this is an impossible mission, because no matter who you are, you're always going to continue to make these mistakes. Even if you say, well, that's a bad thing and I don't want to do that, but it's something, I'm still going to do it. Because you're not a robot. You're not going to just turn a switch off and say, well, those bad things I've been doing, and I've been doing for a long time, I'm just going to be a perfect person now. I'm just not going to do any of that stuff anymore. I'm just going to, and there's this sort of like inner lie that's what the idea is, with Christianity, that the idea is, well, you're going to just become perfect. So you accept Christianity and then you become perfect. And you don't do any of those bad things anymore. Which I don't think is really the message. I don't think that's really the intent. I don't think that's really what that story is really about. Instead, there's this concept of that, the core message of Christianity is that Christ dies on the cross to take away your sin. Now that sounds at first glance like a really generous thing. Like, wow, you're willing to go through all this for me. That's really nice of you. Gosh, I don't deserve it. So that's what it sounds like. It has this appearance of being generous. But I would read something else on it, that it's not generous at all. That it is more of a statement of fact. That you aren't responsible for any of the bad things that you are doing, have done, or will do in the future. You're literally not responsible, because there's nothing you can do to change it. So the point of that is really the realization, not that someone is, generously taking the blame for this away from you, but that you truly aren't to blame. That it really isn't you, that sin doesn't belong to you. It belongs to the universe. It belongs to, God. It belongs to whoever you believe in. They are, whoever the creator of the universe, or the universe itself, if there is no creator. But whatever exists out there as this mass of complex, cause and effect, that is what's responsible for all this, not you. You are watching a movie. You can't possibly get in there and monkey with every lever to produce the outcome you want. And most of the time when we try to do things intentionally, we try to make changes. We usually, it's very easy just to make that worse. The road to hell is paved with good intentions. So that isn't a generous offer. When the offer, the fundamental offer of Christianity is, well, you accept the gift, that you're given, and if you don't, you're going to hell. And this is that same kind of story, but just told a little bit of a different way, which is that the gift is realizing you are not responsible, that you don't have to keep, hitting yourself over the head for all of the, your lack of perfection, for the changes you're not able to make in your life, for the things beyond your control. You're smoking and you want to not smoke, and that's might happen. It might not, but that's all going to be based on what's appropriate for you and the moment in which you're living. So it's not you that started that, and it's not you that will finish it. That's all predetermined. And that's just a moment that you'll fall into. You're on a Disneyland ride. You're just going through what is already set, and that's not your responsibility to start or stop, or change the direction. You're on a track. That track's going. That's the universe. And so that's kind of ultimately another way of viewing the message of Christianity is that, not that I'm advocating for a particular religion, which if you listen to this, you know that that's not even possible, because you're not just going to, oh, wow, he said the word Christianity, so I should become a Christian. So it's much more complicated. It's much deeper than all of that. And the message here is, well, if you accept that, it's told in a lot of metaphors, but if you accept this idea that Christ or God is responsible for your sins, is taking those sins, it is really a release, a surrender to say, I am not the person that is truly responsible for all of these things that I don't like about my life, and I'm not also going to be the person ultimately responsible for changing them. That no amount of willpower, no amount of beating myself over the head is going to make those things happen. That kind of change is much deeper, which isn't to say that you don't try to make that effort, because you can't not make that effort. That's a discomfort there are certain things in your life you're going to be uncomfortable with that then prompt you to make the serious fundamental changes that you need to make. So in my own case, I was vegetarian for a really long time, and I tried going vegan a couple of times, but it just didn't work, and I couldn't, I just couldn't feed myself. I didn't feel healthy about that, and so I didn't do it. And then when I got married, my wife was vegan, and she started cooking for me, and she was cooking for about a month, and I suddenly realized that I hadn't actually had anything that wasn't vegan for like the last month. And it wasn't intentional. I hadn't set out. Maybe it was intentional on her side, I don't know. But I hadn't specifically avoided it. It just hadn't happened. And then I came to this point where I was like, well, I'm not going to let that slide. So I literally went out, bought a block of cheese, and made myself, a burrito or something, I don't know. And it made me sick. I couldn't go back. It's not for lack of trying. I did. But I just couldn't do it. And I realized that this whole time I had a discomfort of, that for me, what was sort of like a halfway, so for me, not for everyone, but for me, being vegetarian was like a half measure, of a little bit of animal, but not, like meat. But I couldn't do that because there was a discomfort in my mind that resided there, that's lived with me. And then ultimately I came to a set of circumstances that really helped me make that change. And then I couldn't go back because I realized that ultimately I was much more comfortable moving forward as a vegan than remaining as a vegetarian, because it resolved that fundamental discomfort that I'd always carried with me. That's my own process. Obviously everyone's in a different place. So if I go back to my past self and say, oh, well, you're not vegan, you're a lowly vegetarian. look at me, I've made this change. Of course not, because everyone is in a journey at some point of that journey, and sometimes that journey goes in one direction, and sometimes it goes in another direction, and it's really impossible to predict. And when you go back to people's past experiences and point at them for being a smoker, or for doing this or doing that's not something that is socially approved of. That's just part of where they are, part of their journey, and and not them, not truly them. Or maybe it's just where they need to be, even if the result of that isn't something that either you approve of in yourself or you approve of in others. It doesn't really make any difference, because you're always exactly where you need to be. So that's where determinism and change actually work really well together, because it allows you in every moment to realize that whatever change is happening in your life is what's supposed to happen. Whatever change is not happening in your life is also what's supposed to be there. And you don't have to worry about it. That change isn't you and force of will and all of this making it happen. That change is organic within you. You can't stop it, even if you wanted to. And really, honestly, you can relax. You're good. Don't worry. If the change is meant to happen, if it's the right thing for you, it will happen.